All right, Dr. Tatiana Strait here, and I want to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is the role of emotions in negotiations. And I love talking about emotions because I think it's often overlooked, and there's a lot of myths around what is and isn't professional. And at the end of the day, my little snippet's going to be we are social animals, and emotions is one of the ways and one of the languages in which our relationships are built. So it's really important to understand their role in negotiations. So negotiations are happening all the time in our personal and professional space. It's not just about, those little moments with the client or in the boardroom where you think an official negotiation is happening. We're negotiating all the time. When you're having a conversation with your boss in the elevator, speaking about a client, talking about the strategy you're going to take, when you're walking with your client to the boardroom and you're exchanging those little pleasantries and building the relationship, all those little moments are actually impacting the relationship and the negotiation that's going to take place. And that's what we call shadow negotiations. Everything that kind of happens outside of that boardroom is part of that boardroom. And in our relationships, if you live in a family, you have kids, you have siblings, listen, every time we're interacting, we're reinforcing or eroding those relationships. So every moment is valuable and important. And human beings are very complex. But one thing I personally love about humans is that at the end of the day, it's all about cooperation. That's really how we succeeded as a species. And yes, competition is a part of our fabric, but more so in service to cooperating as a species, aligning interests, figuring out how we're going to make these very big goals happen. So let's talk a little bit about what emotions are. And I find it fascinating because when I'm in a classroom and I ask, what are negotiations? You get this like really hodgepodge of answers. Something like, well, they're feelings, they're things, I don't know, they happen inside my body. And part of that's true, but part of that is more about the lack of language that we have for negotiation. So emotions and their expressions are really things that are in their physiological reactions. Okay, so they're grounded in something. They're always related to a person, place, or an event. People are not having magical reactions in reference to nothing. There is an actual component to there. And they're kind of like a social language. It's a dance that's happening between people. So emotions provide important information. It conveys valuable information about the negotiation, the position, the relationship. It offers cues to what is important and what isn't. Emotions influence actions, so they often act as incentives to reinforce or remove behaviors. And one of the best kind of examples I have of that is with a kid. If you want to reinforce something, you go, yeah, keep going. And that positivity is quite infectious and enjoyable at a very base level. So emotions reinforce that situation to say, yeah, keep going. I like that. Or negative emotions, if your kid is ripping up paper for no reason, just saying it happens in the house, you're just like, oh, please stop. But you do the appropriate emotion. You ask to stop, you refrain the positive emotion, and that's actually influencing the action to say, like, don't do that again. I don't like it. So emotions are creating this really interesting dance amongst ourselves. It's revealing an internal world. It's facilitating coordination between action, and the coordination aspect is really interesting. And when you think about the world of improv, I think it's one of the best ones that really plays in that space of how do we use emotions to coordinate. So in improv, there's this game called Yes and. And yes and is a way that you build on people rather than break away their ideas. So you say yes, and you kind of shift it and make it something that you want. But that yes and that positivity is one of the ways that we actually coordinate as a group. And in the business context, wherein we're engaging in creative problem solving and we're trying to think about things, we're doing that all the time. And it's rewarding. That's like the third aspect. So emotions are very given. They're facilitating a social process for us. They're very much required to influence the relational problem solving aspect that's happening. And that is a very professional kind of place that we can see these things at work. Unfortunately, I would definitely say our culture is a little bit emotion phobic, and there are some myths that I think perpetuate the idea that they're not good, that they're not professional. So let's talk a little bit about those myths and change them. So I'd say one of the common myths in our culture is that emotions are irrational. And there's ideas that, like, if a person is very emotional, they must be very irrational. But I would say here, there's kind of a tie between someone who is unregulated and the idea that emotions are actually quite rational and there's a social function to them. So first, emotions, like, were one of the most primitive languages that we can think of before language came up. So emotions are some of the ways that our ancestors communicated. And if you think about it, if we were amongst a fireplace and there's someone screaming in the background, everyone's going to turn around and look and understand that that's a bad situation. Emotions were articulating, danger or excitement and letting your guard down before we had the ability to have these conversations and say, like, yes, I'm feeling bad, or like, I see some threat, something's wrestling there. Emotions lay the groundwork for how we communicate. Now, there's a difference between people that are very much dysregulated or bullies or angry and don't know how to communicate that effectively. So when we're talking about irrationality, what we're usually labeling is those other aspects of different people's emotional lives. But emotions at the core are these very social, intelligent things that are part of our body and very much part of the social fabric of us. The second myth, and I love this one, and I asked, do people experience the same emotions in the classroom? When I ask this in the classroom, sometimes there's tons of people that think, like, people do not experience their emotions the same, especially if you get a group of people from different cultures, because of course, like, certain cultures are very expressive and certain aren't, but that's very much a myth. So we are very much hardwired to feel the exact same emotions. But then culture comes in and socializes us to express them in different ways. And so a culture can socialize different cultures. Culture can socialize genders. Culture can socialize different classes to, express emotions differently. So that aspect of it sometimes creates a misunderstanding of people's internal worlds, because sometimes you meet someone. Yes, there are also personality differences, but there are personality differences, then there's like socialization differences, and you might be sitting there thinking, like, oh, I'm having this very emotional experience I want to express, but the person in front of me isn't really expressing, so I don't really know what's going on. But that's really speaking to the influence of culture on how emotions are expressed, rather than the very beautiful fundamental fact that everyone experiences emotions. And everyone will have different flavors of depth, but there is no culture in the world where, happiness is not an enjoyable type of emotion to have. There's some very beautiful work by Paul Ekman, where he was trying to actually discover this thing, to ask, well, how universal are emotions? I think it was back in the 60s. And he would go to cultures before they got very influenced by external, like, social media and cultures, and he would show pictures of people with different faces and different positions, and he would ask them to narrate, well, what's happening in this photo based on the face. And a lot of that work laid the foundation that, yes, like, there are basic felt emotions across cultures. Yes, culture might influence the way we express it, but ultimately we all feel the same emotions, and that's just a very beautiful fact to know and appreciate. The second myth is that emotions are unprofessional. And I think this is an idea especially picked up by certain lineages of economics, to say that everything that is emotional or psychological doesn't have a place in humans engaging in a business endeavor. But quite frankly, emotions are part of human interactions. We're social, and they're actually the part that helps facilitate trust building and helps us understand what matters to our counterpart or not. Suppressing them has very interesting unintended consequences, and I'll show you a quick example. If you were engaging with me in a professional setting and I was letting myself be expressive, there's a certain ease that you have. But if I cut all those emotions out and I suppress my emotions and my body language and my voice, all of a sudden it starts becoming uncomfortable. And imagine us having a meeting like this, and the feedback I'm giving you on a proposal is like this. It actually starts getting very unsettling, because what's happening is we're removing the emotional information from the channel, and it starts creating a physiological unease because you don't know what's happening with the other person. There's actually a word for that in the psychological space and in the marriage literature, and that's called stonewalling. When you remove all emotional cues from what's in front of you, you're creating, you're sending, one, the message that the other person does not influence you and you don't care. And three, you're activating unease in the person's neurological system. So it's very hard to actually create trust in a professional setting when you are creating that dynamic unintentionally by removing emotions from the interaction. So emotions are very much a secret weapon, and a good one. And when I talked to, I had this cool study where I was talking to lawyers, new ones and experienced ones, and I was trying to get a sense of what's the difference of the best lawyers in their field. And one of the things was the best lawyers, the seasoned ones, knew emotions and relationships were the tactic to create very good negotiation situations for their clients later on. They were very relationally based. They understood the importance of emotions, and they were exceptionally strategic about it. So the fourth myth kind of builds on this, and it's the idea that the poker face, which is removing all cues, is the way to go. But actually, that very kind of stoic demeanor removes trust, because people don't understand what's happening. They also have no way to gauge what is or isn't important to you. So I think it's really important to have that shift that emotions are normal, it's healthy, it's part of the way we interact because we're social beings. They belong in the workspace, they're a benefit to the workspace. But the question is, how do we become strategic about it? So that's another cool thing we can discuss in a future video. But I'll say this, a few more things. Emotions matter when there's trust between people, and it's very much one of the first behavioral dances that people engage in to develop trust. Emotions matter when people are being cooperative. When people are being uncooperative, that those emotions start to kind of dissipate, and there's a very different flavor. So it's really important to know that when a switch happens, there's a reason. Authenticity is very important when it comes to emotions, and there are systems in the body to pick up when someone's being genuine or not. So it's really important to learn how to use your emotions as they are, because they are a cue for someone else. And finally, power dynamics are very important in the space of emotion. So there's tons of really interesting research to say that when you're of a lower power, you're very sensitive to the emotions of the person above you. And evolutionary, it makes sense because you're very attuned to the leader to give you rewards or punishments based on what's happening. When you're in a power position, you're desensitized to the emotions of the people below you. And that can be positive or negative depending on what kind of leader you are, because you could miss some really important information that's happening that might be valuable for you to make decisions. And these power dynamics also play out in job offer negotiations. So for example, if you have a sense, like if you're applying and you have another job offer on the table, or you're negotiating with a client and you know your manager has your back, you actually have the ability to be more desensitized to the person in front of you and be assertive. When you don't feel a sense of power, and that's situational, also psychological, you are much more likely to influence by the person in front of you, make concessions, and also agree to deals that might not be in your might not be as favorable to you as you would want. So it's really important to understand that power dynamics are at play. And if you find yourself in a situation where you might not be more powerful, it's really important to play on that psychological piece to make sure you come into the interaction feeling good and buffered so you can be assertive. So that is some of the things I wanted to share. I think in another video we'll do a deeper dive, but I love the world of emotions and negotiations. I think there's so much power to understanding, one, that emotions matter, and two, how to play in the space that is very much scientifically evidence-based. And there's so many cool studies to talk about how to maximize outcomes, how to build trust, how to get people to be more cooperative. So I'll definitely be sharing that in the future.